I'm Brittany, this is Aming, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, we continue our journey towards the end of all of Heaven to Fish's Blessing, all 750,000 words of it. We are now down to the last 75 pages, I think, somewhere around there. We're on page 65 for chapter 128. We just solved the male friend trio problems in a very lava way that was ultimately life-threatening and charming all at the same time. However, MXTX managed to pull that off, and then now I think with almost no other choice, considering how little time we have left, we're going to get to some of the nitty-gritty today. I don't think it's possible to get anything else. We read for a couple of hours and we get about 40-50 pages. I know that the main story stops at about page 170, if I remember correctly, and then after that there's bonus stories, like there was with Modazushi. And of course we'll be reading the bonus stories, but either today or tomorrow or maybe even on Thursday, we'll be done with the main story, which is a lot. Although there was a lot in the bonus stories for Modazushi, so I'm kind of anticipating that it's going to be the same case here. Like, there was a lot of color. There was a lot of color in the Modazushi extra stories that told us a lot about a variety of things. And I have no reason to think that that's not the case with this as well. So we're just going to start. Right? I mean, there's nothing to worry about with a chapter called Bloody Rain-Sought Flower, Vicious Battle Against White No-Face. There's no reason to be stressed. There's no reason why I have wine or anything and some backup tea. It's just a light and breezy reading stream, you know? I remembered to bring a pen in addition to the paper in case I needed to write anything down that was light and fluffy. And so we're just gonna begin. We're gonna go with this. We were like right in the middle of something scary happening because these people love a cliffhanger from chapter to chapter. So once again, we're gonna start off with action. Whew, let me make sure I don't whack a Ming and knock him over. All right. All right. Okay. At that moment, all three felt a wave of heat surge from below. They all cried, "Watch out!" and their feet moved faster as 7 or 8 pillars of fire shot to the skies. Even more of the molten, vengeful spirits had gathered below. "Feng Shen, give Mu Qing to me," Xie Lian called out. Without another word, Feng Shen peeled Mu Qing off his back and tossed him to Xie Lian. Once on Xie Lian's back, Mu Qing exclaimed, "Finish them off quickly! What a nuisance!" "I don't need you to tell me that," Feng Shen replied as he pulled his bowstring to ready multiple arrows at once, because he has to be hot about it for some reason. His bow attacks could hit a much wider area than the spiritual blasts that he and Xie Lian had been firing off wildly. The arrows made explosive impact with the lava, sending waves surging high into the air and eliciting screams from all around. "Nice work," Xie Lian complimented. "It's all right, I guess," Mu Qing commented from his back. The vengeful spirits were full of rancor, and after another huddle, they swam farther ahead and worked together to blow flames at them. After a series of rumbles, Xie Lian said, "They've burnt through a stretch of the bridge ahead. They want to cut off our path." "Fucking hell," Feng Shen cursed. "You're all teaming up, working so hard. Why do you have to hurt people? The way I see it, none of you are ever leaving that lava, not for another 8,000 years. The moment he raised his bow, the molten vengeful spirits scattered again. "All right, stop yelling and get ready," Xie Lian said. "We're gonna jump. 1, 2, 3. On 1, they began to speed up. On 2, they calculated the number of steps remaining. On 3, their feet pushed off, and they jumped. 3 figures leapt into the air, passed over the gap in the broken bridge, and then landed on the other side before continuing their mad dash. The bridge had been created as a path to the heavens, so, naturally, it sloped gradually upward. However, the more they ran, the lighter Xie Lian felt, light as a swallow. It's been a long time since the three of us did something like this, huh? Is now the time? Really? Do you mean fighting side by side or running for our lives? Mu Qing questioned. Both, Xie Lian said. We do this all the time, Feng Shen exclaimed. Really? Xie Lian wondered. Well, one's state of mind obviously changed completely once they cleared the air. Xie Lian let out a sigh, but his careful eyes never stopped scanning below them. There was still no sight of a red silhouette, so he couldn't help but be a little on edge. Sen Lung! His call echoed in the expansive, empty underground cave, but no one answered. Xie Lian licked his dry lips. He scanned the room, eyes darting this way and that, and Mu Qing was silent for a moment as he watched from his perch on Xie Lian's back. Your Highness, you really like him, huh? I mean, welcome to the story, Mu Qing. It's wonderful to have you. Like, what do you... Xie Lian hadn't expected him to ask that out of nowhere, as it was readily observable to anybody with their faculties about them. Although his expression was completely blank, the tips of his ears were gradually turning red. Seeing him like this, Mu Qing couldn't think of what to say, so after a moment of hesitation, he plowed ahead. I'm not trying to scare you on purpose or anything, but I have to remind you, have you considered maybe we were the only two sent to the bridge, and Crimson Rainsought Flower wasn't? Duh! Of course he was sent elsewhere, since there's only the two of you here, Feng Shen responded, but he trailed off once he realized what Mu Qing was trying to say. Rather than saying Hua Cheng had been sent elsewhere, he was saying that Hua Cheng might have fallen into the lava. Xie Lian licked his lips again. How could that be? Don't say it's impossible, Mu Qing said. Crimson Rainsought Flower is a supreme ghost king, no doubt about that, but White No-Face is too. He's from the first generation of supreme ghost kings, and he's the master of Mount Tonglu. This place is his territory, the domain where his spiritual powers are strongest. Feng Shen glared furiously at Mu Qing. Shut your mouth! What's wrong with you? Can't you say something positive at a time like this? He scolded. He's the Crimson Rainsought Flower, I'm telling you. Mu Qing stopped, but he couldn't resist countering Feng Shen's statement. I just think we have to consider what to do in the worst-case scenario. That offending roll of a 1, the single dot so unusually vividly red and stark against Hua Cheng's pale palm, surfaced in Xie Lian's mind. He didn't know how to respond, but just as he was going to try, he came to an abrupt stop. Feng Shen was following right behind and almost collided with him. What is it? As soon as he asked, he realized there was no need. Ahead of them, millions of shimmering silver sparkles clouded the air, twinkling like stars. It was as if someone had toppled a jewelry box full of silver powder. Xie Lian put Mu Qing down and walked forward. Reaching out a hand, he gently touched a gleaming piece of silver that was slightly larger than the rest. Upon making contact, he closed his palm and slowly brought it before his eyes. The other two approached to inspect it as well, and Feng Shen muttered, This is... It's a fragment of a wraith butterfly? Mu Qing said simply. The overly blunt observation earned him another scornful glare from Feng Shen. Xie Lian's hand trembled a little. He let out a long breath as he clutched the silver wing fragment, still glowing faintly. That gives me an impression, but I don't want to say it, so I won't. Feng Shen scratched his head. Look on the bright side. At least he didn't actually fall into the lava. He must have been here, right? And fought with someone, Mu Qing said, pointing to one side. A serious fight. Xie Lian's eyes followed his gesture, then went wide. All the rocks around them were covered with countless terrifying gashes made by a sharp blade, the distinctive blade marks of a Ming. If anything happens to a Ming, I believe in MXTX that she would not do that to me, but I'm just saying. Just throwing that out there now. All the rocks around them were covered with countless terrifying gashes made by each strike from that scimitar sliced straight to the bone. It wasn't as though Xie Lian had never seen Hua Cheng use his blade before, but his style had always been relaxed and easy, nonchalant and casual, less handling a weapon than toying with a pocket knife. But these blade marks were from strikes fueled by killing intent. It was easy to imagine the enormous skill level of his opponent and how perilous their battle had been. Without saying a word, Xie Lian fell to the ground to check. There was no trace that anyone had fallen from the bridge, nor were there any vengeful spirits gathered below it in celebration. Xie Lian finally relaxed a little and got to his feet, then quietly sprinted forward resolutely on his own. Behind him, Feng Shen hoisted Mu Qing onto his back and went after him. "Your Highness!" Xie Lian didn't want to hear his own harsh, anxious breathing, so he held his breath. Disrupting one's airflow was a great taboo for a martial artist. Not only did it add an unnecessary burden to the body, it also disrupted the rhythm of the heart. But even holding his breath was useless. His hands, arms, and legs were shaking. As he ran and ran, he tripped, fell, and tumbled, rolled a dozen times, even nearly careened off the bridge. Feng Shen and Mu Qing both yelled at him to be careful. Suddenly, Xie Lian came to a halt and looked back. "What's that sound?" he asked. "Do you guys hear it? Is that the sound of battle?" Feng Shen and Mu Qing both cried, "Yes! And yes!" They could hear the cracking and rumbling of weapons clashing and spiritual powers colliding. Even the heaven-crossing bridge shook faintly. Lights flashed from within the darkness of the path ahead. Someone was fighting up there. Xie Lian rushed forward, half crawling and half stumbling. Behind him, Feng Shen muttered, "Fucking hell, may all the gods and Buddhas grant their blessings. That better be Crimson Rain-sought flower, otherwise he's gonna lose it." "Stop with that rubbish," Mu Qing berated. "We're the gods and Buddhas, and we can't grant shit. Just keep up with him. Look at how he's stumbling. He's gonna trip and fall flat on his damned face before he even sees the man." Xie Lian had completely forgotten about holding his breath, and his own disorderly panting echoed in his ears as he ran on and on. After many twists and turns, he at last rounded the final corner, and bright white light filled his vision. At the end of the suspended heaven-crossing bridge, a man in red and a man in white were engaged in a vicious battle. Here we fucking go. The red-clad man wielded a long, slender silver scimitar, and his form was spectral as he flashed in and away like lightning. It was Hua Cheng, and he wasn't smiling anymore. He was completely focused, his expression sharp. There was a smear of blood on his pale, handsome cheek, adding a splash of vivid color to his biting frost. The white-clad man was, of course, White No-Face. He was wielding a sword that he had collected from somewhere, and his face was still hidden behind a half-smiling, half-crying mask. However, that mask was a little bit different from the one Xie Lian had seen before. It was cracked in the middle. The crack was significant, impossible to ignore. It went from the center of the forehead all the way down to the cheek just below the eye. The mask looked like it could shatter at any moment. The aura of evil seethed all around. Both combatants were astoundingly light on their feet, deftly bounding off and leaping forward in an instant. And yet each strike still carried 1,000 tons of weight, the force of their blows blasting to the skies above. The chi of the sword flew wildly. The gale of the scimitar danced maniacally. Wraith butterflies faced off against the molten vengeful spirits below, both sides shrieking at one another with enough force to collapse mountains and overturn seas. Each time they clashed, molten lava and blazing fire exploded within the pool, sending terrifying waves surging meters high. No one else could get close. Feng Shen and Mu Qing finally arrived, but both were immediately nailed to the ground by shock at the scene before them, unable to move a single step more. No martial god could watch a battle such as this and not be seized with excitement. Seeing that Hua Cheng was perfectly fine, Xie Lian's restless heart was finally at ease. He wanted to collapse to the ground immediately, to scream and yell, but he forced himself to hold it in. When skilled fighters clashed, any sudden disturbance could decide victory or defeat, and this was a battle between two supreme ghost kings. On White No-Face's side, there was another figure standing in the far distance, the state preceptor. Naturally, he had been brought here by White No-Face. The man breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing that Xie Lian and company had come, but he didn't dare to recklessly make noise either. However, Hua Cheng had already noticed the newcomers. His icy focus melted slightly, and a grin finally spread across his face. "It seems you failed again. His Highness has arrived, and there is not a single person missing from his group." Xie Lian couldn't hold back any louder and shouted, "San Lung!" Hua Cheng inclined his head as he answered, "Gaga." His tone then turned to one of warning. "Gaga, I'm going to get mad the next time you make yourself fall like that." Why would it be any different? Why would it be any fucking different at all? There is no reason for it to be. Why would it? Xie Lian gave him a warning too. "I'll get even madder the next time you jump down with me." Hua Cheng's face stiffened for a second, as if Xie Lian's words really did cause him momentary dread. Even facing off against White No-Face, he'd never shown such an expression before. White No-Face crushed in close. The one he struck at was Hua Cheng, but the one he spoke to was Xie Lian. "Shenlei, you two are far too delighted with each other right now. Shouldn't you be taking me a bit more seriously?" The eyeball on Ming's hilt caught sight of Xie Lian and started spinning wildly. Hua Cheng flipped his hand and thrust, and Xie Lian heard a crack. His heart lurched. That was the sound of a weapon breaking. All those present hastily looked to see where the sound had come from. The scimitar in Hua Cheng's hand was fine, but the longsword wielded by White No-Face had been snapped in half by a strike. Thank you! In MXTX we trust. Thank you. Because if I had just said it, and then... Ming's eyeball spun wildly once more, as if showing off in front of Xie Lian had made it so happy it was in heaven. Hua Cheng laughed heartily. "It's fine. There's no reason for Gaga to worry," he said easily, then addressed White No-Face. "And why should I care for the likes of you?" White No-Face humphed. Afraid that Hua Cheng would enrage his opponent, the state preceptor couldn't hold back anymore and shouted to him, "Young man, don't be so cocky." However, Oy. What Hua Cheng said next was even more audacious and brazen. He smiled as he pointed the sparkling sharp scimitar at White No-Face with one hand. "After all, at the end of the day, you're just a jealous old geezer." The state preceptor couldn't even bother to berate his fake smile at this point. Even Feng Xin and Mu Qing were stunned. The guts of this man! Who would dare say such a thing directly to Jun Wu or White No-Face? They all had to admit that only Hua Cheng would dare, for he was probably the only one against whom neither Jun Wu nor White No-Face could retaliate. Mu Qing got off Feng Xing's back on his own and walked a few steps, mumbling to himself. No wonder. In the past, Jun Wu always told us to avoid Crimson Rainsought Flower if we could, and to never face him head on. A ball of white shadow flashed in front of the point of Ming's blade, blocking it. Xie Lian's sharp eyes identified the creature, and he shouted, "San Lung, don't cut that thing!" It was the fetus spirit! God damn. Xie Lian saw it, so naturally Hua Cheng did as well. He easily slowed the blade's momentum, and with a slant of its tip, the slashing motion became a flick that flung away the white ball. Once Feng Xin saw that the fetus spirit hadn't been chopped in half, his shrunken pupils returned to normal. Shaking off his shock, he yelled, "Come here!" Hua Cheng had flung the fetus spirit precisely in his direction, and Feng Xin rushed forward to catch it. However, the sparse hair on the fetus spirit's head bristled as soon as it heard Feng Xin's shouted order, and angry snarls gurgled from its throat. The moment Feng Xin approached, it chomped at him like mad and refused to let him pick it up. Feng Xin couldn't help but be outraged. Fucking hell, it sticks to him the moment it sees him, but when it sees me, it bites. Just who's your dad here? Have you ever thought of it as your son? Mu Qing cut in. Have you ever even called it by its proper name? This comment left Feng Xin stumped. Meanwhile, Xie Lian couldn't sit still and watch the battle anymore. The two of you be careful, he hastily instructed. I'm going up for a closer look. You be careful yourself, Mu Qing said quietly. Don't forget, you still have 2 shackles. Xie Lian was slightly taken aback. Unthinkingly, he touched his neck to feel the cursed shackle there. For some reason, he didn't think White No-Face would use the shackle against him. There was no more time for words. He rushed forward. Great! A flash of red and a flash of white whirled in vicious battle. After observing for a moment, Xie Lian determined it would be difficult to plunge into the chaotic fight. For now, he whipped out Royer to wrap up the state preceptor and pull him over. Master, are you all right? The state preceptor wiped the cold sweat from his face. Fine. If you're fine, then why are you sweating so heavily? Xie Lian asked. That's all thanks to Crimson Rainsought Flower, the little bastard with no filter on his mouth. What a fright, the state preceptor cried. Just then, Feng Xin let out a surprised shout. Xie Lian raised his head and saw that White No-Face was slowly lowering his head. He was injured. He opened his palm and glanced down at his blood-drenched hand, let out a sigh, and then chuckled. It's been many years since anyone has managed to hurt me like this. Xie Lian felt a sense of foreboding. Master, is he angry? Right now, the state preceptor was the one who best understood White No-Face. Perhaps the only one in the world who did. No, he's worse than angry. He's happy. After a pause, White No-Face turned to Hua Cheng. He sounded quite interested as he asked, Your scimitar, did you forge it using your missing eye? Excuse me? Wait, no, I feel like this is an obvious thing. Duh, because there's an eye in a Ming, and Hua Cheng is missing an eye. And they're obviously connected on a rather hilarious emotional level. So, yeah, it was obvious Hua Cheng had no interest in responding, but Xie Lian's heart jolted violently. From the first time he saw a Ming, he knew that the scimitar was unusual. He had half guessed that it might have been forged from the eye Hua Cheng had lost, but White No-Face sounded so certain. Could it really be true? I mean, I feel stupid that I didn't think of that before. To the point where they're bringing it up now, and I'm like, oh, no, yeah, of course that's a thing, sure. But had we ever put 2 and 2 together before? Probably not. But it feels so damn natural that it feels like a non-discovery. I'm having a very weird emotion at the moment. It's a revelation, but it's not. You know? I'm sure there's detail in here that is about to knock me on my ass. But, like, of course. Of course. Right? Whew. Winter. The state preceptor's brow wrinkled, and after a moment he said, Oh, I remember now. What do you remember? Xie Lian asked. I once heard my friends speak of an incident, the state preceptor said. Many centuries ago, a wrath ghost came to Mount Tonglu. I'm sure at least 1 million wrath ghosts have paid a visit to Mount Tonglu, Mu Qing said. Don't interrupt, the state preceptor exclaimed. That wrath ghost, he was newly formed, very young. He was already on the brink of dissipating completely when he arrived, yet for some reason he held on and drifted here. Although he didn't know why, Xie Lian's heart started racing. Almost dissipated. Why? He had suffered grievous injuries, the state preceptor replied. His soul was almost fully dispersed, and hardly any conscious mind remained to him. But still he floated along, repeating again and again that he wouldn't leave. He wouldn't leave. Probably because his wish hadn't been fulfilled. Anyway, an accident happened when Mount Tonglu opened that year. When Xie Lian heard he wouldn't leave, for some reason he felt almost happy, even as his heart squeezed for the little ghost. You know, the other shoe's gonna drop sometime. What kind of accident? He asked quickly. Not only had millions of ghosts converged on Mount Tonglu, but a group of living humans had accidentally wandered into this forbidden land and were locked inside. What? The only things that live inside Mount Tonglu's domain are nefarious creatures. Ordinary people have no way to break out of the domain. Their certain fate is to become nourishment for the rest. But the Wrath Ghost, in his confused state, took the large group of living humans under his wing and fled for many days. For what reason, I can't say. They were eventually cornered and surrounded by nefarious creatures, and the Wrath Ghost was about to be eaten along with the humans. Xie Lian knew that the solitary wandering ghost must have been Hua Cheng. And then he pushed? Was there a way to flee to safety? Yes, the state preceptor replied. He could escape by forging a blood weapon and killing his way out. Mu Qing couldn't help but chip in. Then wouldn't the easiest sacrifice be... It would be the group of humans that had fallen into such a hopeless position. Take some humans under your wing. Get absolutely fucking cornered. You're all screwed. But you have this one move that will screw everybody else who's going to get screwed anyway. But you get to maybe get out and, you know, fulfill promises and wishes and purposes and stuff. Fucking ow. Hang on. Function and Mu Qing stared at Hua Cheng, who was wholly absorbed in the vicious fight against White No-Face. Did he... Xie Lian held his breath. Yes, the state preceptor said. He made a move. Function and Mu Qing's expressions were unreadable. Xie Lian, however, didn't move a muscle and only waited for the state preceptor to continue. Sure enough, the state preceptor's story progressed as he had anticipated. He made a move. In a fit of madness, he dug out one of his own eyes. The Wrath Ghost almost made a move against the humans as well, but for some reason, he didn't go through with it, the state preceptor continued. He instead used one of his own eyes as the price to forge a blood weapon. The Wrath Ghost was already clinging to existence with his last breath. After digging out his eye, he should have broken apart completely, but something had shocked him to action, and he instead fully regained his senses. I don't know what kind of wicked weapon he forged, but it somehow carried him through that battle. And there was another curious incident after that. Xie Lian forced himself to calm down. What incident? After that battle, the heavens sent forth a heavenly tribulation, and lightning struck straight into Mount Tonglu, the state preceptor said. Do you understand what that means? Was there any need to explain? If a heavenly tribulation had been sent forth, it meant the heavens believed there was someone worthy of ascension within Mount Tonglu. Xie Lian grabbed the state preceptor. Who was it who ascended? This is all hearsay, the state preceptor said. But there has never been I'm sorry, I'm my brain's out to lunch. But there has never been a heavenly official in the upper court who hailed from Mount Tonglu. Either what I heard was purely fabricated, or the person who ascended rejected the heavenly realm and jumped right back down. Mu Qing couldn't accept it. Ascending as a ghost, he cried in shock. Is that even possible? And he refused and jumped back down? It couldn't have been him, could it? Oh, you fucking know. He had only just entered Mount Tonglu. He hadn't even reached the rank of Supreme. Jumping all the way down like that? He couldn't have even been sure he'd survive. Why did he do it? Why had he gone to such extremes? Just then, Xie Lian heard White No-Face sigh. Shenlei, you have a very faithful believer. As soon as he spoke, the cracked, cry-smiling mask loomed before Xie Lian's face. The sight of it reflected clearly in his eyes. He was mere inches away. Xie Lian hadn't expected White No-Face to draw so close in no more than an instant. Royer shot up like it was bristling and ready to strike, but in the end it shrank back. It wasn't its fault, for it had always been very intelligent. It would give up voluntarily if it knew that its attacks wouldn't work. White No-Face seemed to flash a smile, for the cry-smiling mask's crack grew deeper. The point of Ming's blade grazed White No-Face's neck mere seconds later, but it was late by a step. White No-Face had already dodged away in a flash. He reappeared on the highest point of the heaven-crossing bridge, the point where it abruptly ended, and lifted his hand slightly. No need to be nervous. I was only taking back what's mine. In his hand, he held a long sword. It was entirely pitch black and as frigid as cold jade, with a silver streak down the blade's central ridge, as if its heart had been split in half. Xie Lian reflexively twisted his hand to feel his back. Sure enough, the blade Feng Xin that he had carried on his back was gone. Feng Xin was originally the crown prince of Wu Yang's sword. White No-Face had retrieved what belonged to him. One piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces. The ghastly pale mask flaked off bit by bit until finally it fell completely and revealed the face behind. Within the raging flames, the white robe transformed into white armor. Oh God, it's his final form. Oh God damn it. Ugh. At last, White No-Face had taken off his mask and transformed into Jun Wu. Everyone held their breath, high on guard. There was no need to guess. He had to be even stronger in this form. I mean, if we're going by Final Fantasy rules, then yeah. Young man, don't underestimate your opponent, the state preceptor shouted at Hua Cheng. He's even more difficult to deal with now than he was as White No-Face. You had the advantage of a better weapon earlier, but not anymore. Sure enough, all of the wounds on Jun Wu's body vanished in one sweep. He was restored from head to toe. He glanced at the state preceptor and smiled. Don't you hate it? Don't you hate fucking enemies who heal? Especially final bosses. You finally get them down, and then they change forms, and all of a sudden they heal for 9999. Sometimes they heal for 9999 like 4 times, and you're like, what the fuck did I just do for the past 20 minutes then? I'm fine. He glanced at the state preceptor and smiled. Giving others advice on how to fight me while I'm right here. I won't kill you, but you're certainly becoming bolder. That smile was laced with warning. Although the state preceptor stopped speaking, he still returned Jun Wu's gaze, measure for measure. Don't worry, San Lung has never underestimated his opponents, Xie Lian assured him. He was more than sure of this. No matter how brazenly fearless Hua Cheng's smile seemed, his hands would never relax. Gazing at the sword, Jun Wu gently whispered, Jushin, long time no see. Feng Xin, or Jushin, as it should now be called, gave a deep, quiet moan in his hand. Xie Lian had always thought that Feng Xin was difficult to use because it was old. He even worried it might snap in half one day. He never expected its aura and power to be so different in the hands of its past master compared to his own. Each time Jushin and Ming clashed, the entire heaven-crossing bridge shook as if it might collapse and plummet into the lava. Jun Wu's power and speed had clearly increased by a huge margin. While Hua Cheng was able to match his pace, he still frowned and his jaw clenched harder. Those watching the fight from afar were in a constant state of tension, for every one of Jun Wu's forceful strikes were aimed straight at Hua Cheng's right eye. Shit. That's a sound strategy, though. Shit. Hua Cheng blocked twice, but both attacks were alarmingly close to hitting. He quickly realized Jun Wu was using the same attack each time, as if he had determined Hua Cheng's weakness was his right eye and wanted to gouge it out a second time. Naturally, every time he lunged, Hua Cheng defended with all he had, and blocked again and again, but with this strategy, wouldn't they soon find themselves at an impasse and accomplish nothing? As though it sensed danger, Ming's eye raged with unbridled fury. The black jade blade struck again, and there was a crisp sound of impact. Hua Cheng hadn't raised his scimitar to parry, but Jun Wu withdrew his sword. Xie Lian, a second streak of white, had rushed in to protect Hua Cheng. With a single swift, forceful flick, Jushin's chilling blade rebounded. Xie Lian finally couldn't sit back and watch any longer and had joined the fight. He was skilled in the art of catching blades with his bare hands, but this was the first time he had ever encountered such a sinister sword. A simple light flick had left half his arm numb, especially the palm. The feeling only returned after he backed away a few steps and shook it off. "Gaga," called Hua Cheng from behind him. "Come on, let's do this together," Xie Lian said. Standing back to back, like the action boyfriends they are, they focused their battle resolve against their enemy. Jun Wu's smile only deepened at their display. "Oh?" You know, every now and then, we really truly sense how much fun MXTX has writing these things. And it endears me to her more, because this is exactly the kind of shit that I would put in a moment like this. So, like, I feel very close to her at this moment as a writer. "You take the top and I'll take the bottom," Xie Lian said quietly. As soon as he spoke, the two split off and flew toward Jun Wu, one going up and one going down. Xie Lian had a good grasp of Jun Wu's style and could guess his next move. "Hook," he blurted. Hua Cheng did as directed and unleashed his scimitar once more. Sure enough, Jun Wu almost fell for the trick, and Xie Lian then instructed, "Blast!" Hua Cheng again did as he was ordered. This time he didn't use his scimitar. Instead, he churned his spiritual powers and blasted with his bare hand. Sure enough, Jun Wu was hit in the shoulder and sent reeling for a moment. If not for his wicked speed, those two moves would have probably been fatal hits. As they battled, Xie Lian swiftly came to his senses. Hua Cheng was a supreme of their time. With his level of skill, why would he need Xie Lian's directions? What a terrible affront. His old habits had come out. He was quick to apologize. "I'm sorry, you don't have to listen to me." Hua Cheng, however, only smiled happily in response. "Every piece of advice Gaga gives me is the best course of action. Why wouldn't I listen?" He's like, no, baby. You're perfect. You're beautiful. You're flawless. You've never done anything wrong ever. So, of course, I'm going to listen to you when you give me advice. Suddenly, the bridge below Hua Cheng caved, and he lost his footing. He was about to fall. Xie Lian leapt onto the bridge poles and cast Roye out to wrap up Hua Cheng and reel him back. But a moment later, he felt a sudden chill on his neck. Jun Wu had darted behind him and rested a hand on his shoulder. "Excellent form, Shanlei." He was too close. Xie Lian could feel his hair standing on end. "Gaga!" Hua Cheng exclaimed. He flung out his left hand, and Ming shot through the air. Xie Lian reacted incredibly quickly and ducked just in time for Ming to hurtle past, brushing the top of his head as it slashed at Jun Wu behind him. Only then did Jun Wu release Xie Lian's shoulder, and Xie Lian used the chance to leap back to Hua Cheng's side, just as Ming whirled back to his hand. The pair worked together seamlessly, and those on the side only saw three unimaginably fast figures, flashing here and there like lightning, so fast they found it hard to breathe. Meanwhile, Jun Wu's laughter resonated across the domed ceiling above, like he was encouraging them. Good, very good, continue. Mu Ching dodged away from a piece of the bridge caving in and asked in horror, Master, is he insane? He's laughing. I already told you, the state preceptor said. The only thing worse than him being angry is him being happy. This is only the beginning. I mean, I'm expecting a third form at this point, you know? Now that he was wielding Jushin, Jun Wu was like a tiger with wings. He launched vicious attacks non-stop, all of them aimed directly at Hua Cheng's right eye. Xie Lian was stricken with panic at the sight. Whipping out Roye, he tangled Jushin's hilt. However, Jun Wu suddenly reversed his grip on the sword and yanked, bringing Xie Lian flying toward him. Xie Lian was startled at first, but he soon regained his calm. He'd originally intended to snatch the sword anyway, so there was nothing to be scared of. As he hurtled straight for the blade, his mind instantly played out all the hundreds of possible moves that they might exchange. Yet unexpectedly, halfway through the air, another hand caught him and pulled him back. Xie Lian dropped and landed. When he turned to look, Hua Cheng was there, shielding him. A black jade sword pierced his chest through. Xie Lian almost couldn't breathe at the sight. Senlong? Hua Cheng's expression was grim. Jun Wu had been waiting for Xie Lian to be impaled on Jushin's blade, and was rather disappointed to see that it had been blocked. He withdrew the sword from Hua Cheng's chest and backed away. Xie Lian had completely forgotten that Hua Cheng was a ghost. He could still be up and about, even if a giant hole was punched through his chest. Worried even so, he covered the unbleeding wound on Hua Cheng's chest with both hands. Senlong, what were you doing so rashly? As if I'd let it stab you again in front of me. Hua Cheng responded. Oh, no, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Once again, Hua Cheng with the excellent points. Yeah, For some reason, his tone was a little too extreme. Xie Lian was slightly taken aback. Why do you ache so, Shenlei? Jun Wu's gentle voice drifted in the air. It is not as if he feels the pain. He is nothing more than a dead man. And he dared to remind Xie Lian of that. Consumed with fury, Xie Lian whipped his head around and glared. Isn't this all your fault? Jun Wu only sneered in response. Is it all my fault? His question stumped Xie Lian, and Jun Wu changed the subject. Perhaps, but Shenlei, have you tarried in the mortal realm for so long that you've forgotten what you've done? Do you still remember what you did after Shenlei fell? A deeply meaningful smile appeared on Jun Wu's face as he leisurely asked, Do you still remember a ghost named Wu Ming? In an instant, Xie Lian's face lost all color. Don't! He blurted. The state preceptor sensed that things were going wrong. Your Highness, what's he saying? What did you do after Shenlei fell? Xie Lian felt an odd sense of panic, and he glanced at Hua Cheng, then at Jun Wu. His fury had been transformed into uncertainty. Hua Cheng immediately grabbed hold of him and soothed in a low voice. It's fine, Your Highness. Don't be afraid. Yeah, keep it together, Feng Xin also called out. Mu Ching, on the other hand, was sharper. What did he mean? A ghost? What ghost? But how could Xie Lian keep it together? Those were the most unkempt days of his life, days during which he committed the deed he most regretted. He'd never even dared to think of that period much. Whenever that pale, crescent-eyed, smiling mask surfaced in his mind, his suffering rendered him sleepless and desperate to curl into a ball, never to unfurl and face another person again. Hua Cheng had seen Xie Lian, who basked in glory, had seen a Xie Lian who had been defeated by a lost war. He'd seen a clumsy and foolish Xie Lian, an impoverished and beggared Xie Lian. All of that was nothing. But he had never seen a Xie Lian who rolled in filthy mud, a Xie Lian who yelled and swore, a Xie Lian full of resentment and hate. He'd never seen a Xie Lian who was dead set on annihilating the kingdom of Yang'an for revenge, or a Xie Lian who would go so far as to create human face disease for the second time. That period was too horrible to recall. In the past, he wouldn't have cared one bit if White No-Face decided to rat him out, but now he couldn't bear to find out what expression would cross Hua Cheng's face when he learned of that time in Xie Lian's life. He wasn't as good as Hua Cheng thought he was. He wasn't untainted by filth, saintly and pure. If Hua Cheng showed even a sliver of doubt after learning the truth, Xie Lian would probably never be able to live with himself, and would never have the face to see him again. As he considered all this, Xie Lian's expression turned fiercely grim. Cold sweat rolled from his forehead and his hands trembled. His reaction made Hua Cheng grip his hand harder. "Your Highness, don't be afraid," he said with grave assurance. "Remember, the one basking in infinite glory is you. The one fallen from grace is also you. What matters is you, not the state of you. No matter what happens in the past, I will never leave you. You can tell me anything." To conclude, he added gently, "You told me this yourself." Xie Lian started to pull himself together, but Jun Wu puffed a laugh. "No matter what happens, I will never leave you," he said, the words unhurried. "My most faithful believers, as well as my dearest friends, they also told me that once." The state preceptor's face changed, and Jun Wu shot a glance at him. But in the end, no one was able to truly do as they promised, as you can see. The state preceptor, unable to bear looking at him anymore, turned his head away. "Believe me, Your Highness, won't you?" Hua Cheng pleaded. It wasn't that Xie Lian didn't believe him. It was that he didn't dare to try. In the end, Xie Lian swallowed hard and forced himself to chuckle, but then he felt he shouldn't be laughing, and hung his head. His voice trembled as he said, "Senlong, why don't you... I'm sorry, I might..." Hua Cheng stared at him for a moment, then began to speak. Actually..." Before he could finish, a wave of intense killing intent lunged at them, and the two leapt apart. Some sense returned to Xie Lian, and the color returned to his ghastly pale face. What's with him? Why is he even... faster? Stronger? Jun Wu's speed and power had doubled, and were still growing, far greater than they'd been as White No-Face. They could sense the horrifying surge with every attack. Mu Qing noticed something else, and he shouted, "Your Highness! Be careful, he's changed tactics. He's not attacking Crimson Rainside Flower anymore. He's just going after you now." Naturally, Xie Lian had also realized. Ruye was the only weapon he had on hand, and it couldn't attack Feng Xin head-on. It shrank back at the very sight of it. Fortunately, Eming had flawlessly blocked every strike Jun Wu aimed at him. That's the end of the chapter. And there's more. Because of course there's more. That could have been it. But of course that's not it. Chapter 129. Crack in the white armor. Curious magic shatters the cursed shackles. Is gay love about to pierce the veil and save the universe? Please tell me that gay love is about to pierce the veil and save the universe. Come on. Okay, hang on. We need some wine. Okay. The sword Feng Xin emanated dominating power, and those watching from afar could already feel themselves shudder at the mere sight of it, let alone Xie Lian, who was being forced back by its attacks, step by step. Hua Cheng had been more than capable of taking on White No-Face alone, but the emergence of Jun Wu demanded both he and Xie Lian give it their all to even make an equal match. It was obvious that Jun Wu was at an advantage in having Mount Tonglu as his main spiritual domain. Xie Lian could sense grievous power suppressing them. Rule number 1 of D&D. Well, okay, rule number 2 of D&D. Rule number 1 is don't split the party. Rule number 2 is if you can at all help it, don't take on the boss in his lair. Don't. Don't do it. Never a good idea. Jun Wu was also protected by a layer of white armor. It was an ancient spiritual weapon he had personally forged, and it was practically impenetrable. He only needed to guard his head. Hua Cheng's scimitar was incredibly fast and precise, and Xie Lian also struck whenever he could. The two of them launched an all-out barrage against Jun Wu, aiming at his neck, his heart, his back, his stomach, his shoulders, but nothing they did affected their opponent in the slightest. "Stop wasting your strength, it's pointless," Mu Qing shouted. "It's impossible to penetrate that white armor." "Aim for his waist, just beneath his ribs on the right," Xie Lian exclaimed. I've forgotten how to turn pages. I'm on another plane of existence. Hua Cheng unleashed his scimitar again and struck where Xie Lian had instructed, but as expected, it did nothing. "I told you it's pointless," Mu Qing shouted. "Why don't you come up with a way to withdraw, and then we'll join the fight? Feng Xin, where are your bow and arrows?" Feng Xin was climbing around on the rocks trying to capture the fetus spirit, which was spitting wildly and slithering its tongue at him. When he heard the call, he answered, "All right, I'm coming." However, Xie Lian instructed, "Keep going, don't stop. Attack his right side just below the ribs." "Your Highness," Feng Xin shouted, "that armor is formidable. It might not crack even after hundreds of blows from that scimitar." Nonetheless, Xie Lian was adamant. "Don't worry, just listen to me. It won't take that many strikes." Hua Cheng didn't question him and continued attacking non-stop. Finally, a crack appeared at the spot the blade had been targeting. Blood spurted. A Ming's blade had cut into Jun Wu's stomach on the right side, just below his ribs. Gripping his scimitar in one hand, Hua Cheng stood before Jun Wu and met his gaze squarely with a cold, severe glare. Meanwhile, Xie Lian made it to Jun Wu's side, and Roye took the chance to bind Jun Wu's hands, preventing him from blocking anymore. Mu Qing was dumbfounded. How is this possible? How had Hua Cheng so easily cut through that ancient white armor? Pulling Roye taut, Xie Lian eyed Jun Wu. "Did you forget? You and I had a fight 800 years ago." It dawned on Feng Xin and Mu Qing. "Your second ascension?" When Xie Lian had requested that Jun Wu banish him once more, he also suggested they face off in a match. Although they promised each other that neither would show mercy, in retrospect, Jun Wu must have still held back. But Xie Lian used everything he had. He unleashed over 3,000 swords. Over 400 of them managed to stab Jun Wu, and of those 400, more than 100 had pierced this exact spot. His relentless barrage of swords broke through Jun Wu's impenetrable, ancient white armor and stabbed the right side of his abdomen just below his ribs. That was the exact spot where Hua Cheng's scimitar made it through. Xie Lian had left a weak spot on Jun Wu's armor 800 years ago, and it only took 3 slashes from Hua Cheng to crack it. And Hua Cheng's scimitar was much fiercer than Xie Lian had ever imagined. It would surely inflict a critical hit when it cleaved into Jun Wu's abdomen. He had only just sighed a mental breath of relief when he heard the state preceptor yelled, "That's no use! Logically, Jun Wu's movement should have been hampered by this grave injury, but his expression didn't even change as he lowered his head to give the wound a glance. Just as Xie Lian sensed something was off, Jun Wu's hands moved slightly. Xie Lian heard something tear, and his hold on the band went slack. Roye had ripped. Okay, maybe I wasn't specifically clear, alright? I get that I kind of did not say this part, but when I said that nothing could happen to a Ming, that also therefore naturally implied that nothing can happen to Roye. I might be a sentence too late for that, but that's what of course, nothing can happen to Roye. But something just did. So, the white silk band dropped lifelessly to the ground, fully torn in half. An instant later, Xie Lian felt a hand round his throat, choking him as it lifted him off the ground. Okay, nothing a good sewing job can't fix. You know what I mean? Nothing, some mending, some, I don't know if that's what darning is, but some darning. Probably not crochet, but, something involving a needle of some sort and a thread of some sort. Easily solvable, I'm just saying. He heard Hua Cheng exclaim, "Your Highness!" But his voice suddenly seemed far away. Jun Wu's voice, however, was right beside him. "Shanlei, did you truly believe that I know less of being stabbed than you do? Did you think I would care?" "Stabbing him won't work, even if you do it hundreds of times," the state preceptor called to him. "It seems he cannot feel pain at all anymore." Xie Lian could take a longsword through the heart without flinching. Jun Wu was the same. When he heard the state preceptor, Feng Shen lowered the bow he'd held drawn and aimed at Jun Wu. "What? Then even if we manage to land a hit, it won't matter?" "I have some more bad news," Mu Ching said. "From what I've observed, I suspect he can heal faster than we can injure him." "What?" See, this is where you leave and level up more and come back. When you notice that the guy is healing faster than you can, that's exactly what happens. Right there. Because clearly MXTX has played a video game. So I just wanted to drop that little, hint that you're not quite ready for. I'm stalling. I'm nervous. Where the fuck am I? Xie Lian could verify that. Jun Wu's wound had been terrifying. Anyone else would have been bisected. But he'd already stopped bleeding. "No need to be so surprised," Jun Wu said. "When you're constantly stabbed in the back, you'll die 1,000 times over if you don't force yourself to recover right away. It's the metaphor. But the two of you are certainly something." Jun Wu smiled. "In the past 800 years, I've only been wounded by one sword and one scimitar, wielded by the two of you. Crimson Rainsought Flower, stand back. You wouldn't want to see me wring Shanlei's neck." Hua Cheng's face was dark, and a roaring tempest raged in his eye. But Jun Wu was dangling Xie Lian over the heaven-crossing bridge, and he would only need to release his grip to send Xie Lian plummeting into the fiery pool hundreds of meters below. A moment later, he reluctantly withdrew his scimitar, rested one hand behind him, and slowly backed away a few steps. Although he appeared calm, the scimitar at his side gave him away. A Ming was extremely agitated. Its eyeballs spun wildly and cast desperate looks at Xie Lian. Hua Cheng had to back up to the very edge of the heaven-crossing bridge before Jun Wu was satisfied. That's good enough. Still holding him by the neck, Jun Wu locked eyes with Xie Lian. Then, without a warning, he brutally slammed Xie Lian into the nearby rock wall. The collision was incredibly brutal. Xie Lian's head rang and blood poured messily from his nose and mouth to flow down the contours of his face. He thought he could hear people screaming in alarm in the distance, but he couldn't tell who. The only thing he could hear clearly was Jun Wu's placid voice murmuring in his ear. "Shanlei, does it hurt when your head is smashed against a wall?" Xie Lian, woo! Couldn't quite process the question, so he didn't respond. Thus, Jun Wu grabbed him and slammed him into the rock wall again, before asking him once more. "Does it hurt? Does it hurt? Does it hurt?" I'm going back to, certain inner monologues at certain moments in Xie Lian's history. With each repetition, he slammed Xie Lian into the wall so hard that Xie Lian started screaming. But what he screamed was, "San Lang, don't come over here. I'm fine. Absolutely do not come over." At least not yet. An opportune moment hadn't arrived. Hua Cheng was ready to charge over at the very first slam, but he hadn't taken 2 steps before Xie Lian told him not to approach. and so he forced himself to stop. His face had turned completely savage, and the veins on the back of his shaking hands were about to burst. Although Jun Wu wore no expression on his face, his hand furiously rammed Xie Lian into the rocks as he asked him over and over again, "Does it hurt? Does it hurt?" "Your Highness," the state preceptor cried out. But who knew for whom he was calling? Xie Lian's bloody hands pushed against the uneven rocky surface of the wall. He grit his teeth as he roared, "It hurts." Only then did Jun Wu flash a satisfied smile and spare Xie Lian's poor head. He settled him on the ground. Xie Lian fell back, clutching his ringing skull as tears and blood flowed uncontrollably down his face. Jun Wu crouched next to Xie Lian and stared at him for a while, and then he raised a hand and stroked Xie Lian's head before gently wiping the blood from his face. The gesture was gentle and affectionate, like that of a father comforting a child he had just beaten black and blue. The scene made the hair on Feng Shen and Mu Qing's neck stand up. Has he gone mad? Hua Cheng's hand rested on his scimitar and his knuckles cracked. The pupil of a Ming's eyeball shrank and went bloodshot. Xie Lian didn't breathe a word and simply allowed Jun Wu to wipe him clean. Jun Wu muttered to himself as he did so, "You silly child. If it hurts, why don't you turn back? Do you think that if you keep slamming into a wall, keep smashing yourself against it, it will crumble on its own? Why not change course instead?" "I won't turn back," Xie Lian stated. Jun Wu raised his hand and slapped him, so hard and with such violence that it knocked Xie Lian to the ground with a loud thud. He was still dizzy when Jun Wu picked him back up. In a tone that sounded like he had almost lost patience, Jun Wu asked him, "Must you anger me like this? Let me ask you again. Will you change?" Xie Lian coughed twice, then spat a mouthful of blood. "I won't." A crack finally appeared in Jun Wu's gentle expression, a flicker of savageness. The state preceptor's face was grim. Seeing that this was going downhill fast, he shouted, "Your Highness, you never wanted to kill the boy. You really like him. You said so yourself. Have you forgotten?" Jun Wu snorted. "If I didn't like him, I wouldn't have exhausted all of my patience and tolerance on him alone for the past 800 years. He would have long since become part of the Heavenly Capital's foundation, trampled daily by thousands." A sudden fury seized him and he turned to Xie Lian. "But he doesn't know what's good for him. Stubborn, capricious, unheeding of my every word, he just had to go against me. You won't change, will you? Very well, then why don't we see if this wall will fall if your head is cracked open against it?" When he saw him lifting Xie Lian again, the state preceptor shouted to him hastily, Your Highness, His Highness, the little Highness is still ignorant. Just let him go this time, let it go. He will understand one day." Jun Wu spared a glance at him and his chuckle grew grimmer. "Do you really think I've gone mad? Don't lie to me. He's not the one you think is ignorant. It's me. Isn't that right?" The state preceptor was taken aback, and Jun Wu continued, "You invested so much of yourself into nurturing, teaching, and guiding him, purely because you hoped he could win against me. Also, you can prove that I was wrong and you were right, that you were all in the right. Also, you can cling to the illusion of the perfect crown prince of Wuyang and dismiss the Jun Wu standing before you now. Isn't that your goal? Did you really think I didn't know what you were thinking?" "That's not true," the state preceptor cried. "Stop getting tied up in right and wrong, victory and defeat. I've never thought that way, never." But Jun Wu couldn't bear to listen anymore. He raised his voice, his tone sharp. "Forget it. Let me tell you right now, all of you can forget it. No one can win against me, especially him." Laughing maniacally, he dragged Xie Lian over to the rocks again, slamming him into them as he bellowed, "Will you change? Will you change? Will you change?" As if he'd also gone mad, Xie Lian gripped Jun Wu's arm and roared, I won't change." Even though the beating was so excruciatingly painful that it made him see stars, he stubbornly endured. He adamantly refused to give the desired answer, adamantly refused to change, and oh, how gratifying it was. He'd been pent up for far too long. It was as though he'd been waiting for a chance like this all these years, and tears rolled as he screamed, "I won't change, even if it's painful, even if I die, I won't change. I will never change." Now the tables had turned. Jun Wu was no longer driving Xie Lian mad. Xie Lian was the one pushing Jun Wu to madness. Eyes bloodshot, Jun Wu was about to punish him with another strike when he came to a sudden halt. He craned his neck to peer behind him. A long saber was stuck in his shoulder, and 8 long arrows made of sticks were neatly pinned into his back. Neither of those things mattered, for neither the saber nor the arrows had penetrated his white armor. However, his right hand was gone. That was the hand he'd been using to hold Xie Lian, and it was gone. All of it vanished from his wrist, the cut neat and clean. Xie Lian was also gone. When he turned his head, he sensed something hurtling directly at him, sharp winds whistling around its flight. With a swing of his left hand, he caught the projectile and realized afterward that it was his own right hand. Across the heaven-crossing bridge, Hua Cheng held a blood-drenched Xie Lian. With one hand, he gripped his scimitar in a reverse hold as he hugged Xie Lian's shoulders. He covered the wounds on Xie Lian's head with the other. "Keep your filthy hands off him," he said in a chilling tone. Xie Lian's obstinate refusal to admit defeat had finally enraged Jun Wu enough that he'd left himself open. Jun Wu stuck his hand back onto his wrist, twisted it a couple of times to work out the kinks, and then plucked the arrows from his back. Something seemed to cross his mind, and when he glanced behind him, his eyes happened to land on the one still gripping the long saber, the pale-faced Mu Qing. Mu Qing was startled when their eyes met, but he forced himself to remain calm. That calm didn't last long. Jun Wu glanced at his shoulder. "As expected," he idly commented. "Compared to Shen Lei, you're still lacking." Mu Qing's expression shifted. The long saber in his hand abruptly dropped, and a moment later, his face changed color completely. He yanked up his sleeve, only to find that the black cursed shackle around his wrist had tightened. The veins and nerves around it were bulging as if all the blood in his body was being drawn to that point. Feng Xin saw that Mu Qing was frozen in place and shouted at him, "What are you doing? Just standing there! Run!" "Feng Xin, you little idiot! How can he run with injured legs?" the state preceptor berated. "Oh, fuck," Feng Xin blurted. "He'd completely forgotten." Normally, Mu Qing would have been so angry at this that his eyes would have rolled all the way back into his head, but now he knew it would be pointless even if he fled. Thanks to the cursed shackle on his wrist, it wouldn't matter where he ran. Feng Xin swore. He was about to go over to Mu Qing when Jun Wu hurled the arrows he'd plucked out of his back right at him. Feng Xin felt his chest go cold and he looked down. All 8 arrows had been returned to him, neatly piercing his chest. Jun Wu walked languidly toward Hua Cheng and Xie Lian, but Hua Cheng didn't spare him a single glance. "Guga, Guga," he called to Xie Lian, who was still in his arms. Xie Lian had taken a brutal battering, and it took a while for him to blearily come around, his head still throbbing. But before his eyes even blinked open, he muttered, "Sanlong, are you all right?" Hua Cheng gazed at him for a moment, then suddenly pulled him hard into an embrace. "I'm completely fine," he replied softly. "Why don't you take a look at yourself?" Xie Lian clung to the one who held him. Although the hug was very tight, it did not press on any of his wounds. With great effort, Xie Lian opened his eyes and took in all the chaos around them. Mu Qing was frozen on the spot, one hand clutching the opposite wrist as if he was fighting for control against the blood-sucking cursed shackle. Judging by how pale he was, he might not hang on for much longer. Feng Xin, on the other hand, was slumped over the edge of the bridge. The 8 arrows hadn't pierced him completely through, but his injuries were still severe. The fetus spirit was howling in demonic elation, jumping up and down around him before stomping wildly on Feng Xin's face with one foot. Despite his fury, Feng Shen couldn't move for fear of worsening his injuries. Meanwhile, all of the Heaven Crossing Bridge had started to cave in, stretch by stretch, block by block. They might go down with it at any moment. When he finally processed the situation they found themselves in, Xie Lian panicked and tried to stand. Hua Cheng helped him, and the two rose to their feet. They both gazed ahead. Jun Wu was languidly walking toward them. The firelight all around him made him seem much bigger than he was, and he cast an immense shadow. Staring hard at the approaching figure, Xie Lian wiped hard at the blood around his eyes, nose, and mouth. Jushin's blade coursed with spiritual power in Jun Wu's hold, the blade at a relaxed slant. At the moment, Jun Wu was so calm that he seemed almost a completely different person from the Jun Wu who had manically slammed Xie Lian onto the rocks. Shen Lei, you know that your defeat is assured. He understood Xie Lian too well. Jun Wu knew exactly how he would fight, and his spiritual power overwhelmingly dwarfed Xie Lian's. Xie Lian could sense that Jun Wu's battle aura and spiritual powers had grown even stronger before they exchanged a single blow. In the end, Mount Tonglu was his territory, and it was oh my god! Art fucking out of what? Okay, hang on, we'll get there. Was becoming more and more obvious just how it suppressed their abilities. Xie Lian knew that was probably true. He couldn't win. But even if he couldn't, he had to fight. No, Hua Cheng interjected. Your Highness, you can win. Stunned, Xie Lian stared at him, and Hua Cheng returned his gaze measure for measure. You can win. You're stronger than him. His one eye was as bright as if it were ablaze, and he said with certainty, Believe me, he's wrong. You're right. You're stronger than him. You're much stronger than him. Jun Wu let out a deep, quiet chuckle. Perhaps he was amused by Hua Cheng's naivete, or perhaps he was pleased by all the power he twisted so effortlessly between his fingers. He alone held the power of millions of believers in his grasp. Hua Cheng gripped Xie Lian's shoulders. So what? They're millions of fools. They're all useless trash. But for you, one person is enough. One person was enough. Xie Lian hadn't yet wrapped his head around that before Hua Cheng pulled him close. His eyes widened as spiritual power exploded and rushed in. It is the power of gay love. It's the power of gay love is piercing the veil and saving the universe. This was the most overwhelming transfer of spiritual power he'd ever experienced. Even the wraith butterflies and molten vengeful spirits all around them felt its terrifying intensity. One by one, they began to explode, shrieking as they burst into nothingness. Xie Lian's fingers were practically convulsing. His legs shook so badly that he was about to fall to his knees. In his mind, he cried again and again, "Stop, no more!" But Hua Cheng's hand was firmly locked behind his head, not letting him leave, refusing his refusal. Writing down a note to talk about later, because in the meantime, look at this fucking art! Are you kidding me? Are you I'm not seeing what I'm seeing, right? That's not the cursed shackle breaking around his neck. I'm not seeing that. We haven't gotten there yet, so I don't see it. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Absolutely not. Get my face out of here. A long time passed before Hua Cheng finally released him, and his throat relaxed. Xie Lian's knees buckled, and he dropped to the ground. His hands flew out to support him, and he managed with great effort to keep himself from falling over completely. Jun Wu paused his steps and stared at them, his expression severe. Feng Shen, who was lying some distance away, said with disbelief, Your Highness? Reaching out with trembling hands, Xie Lian felt his own neck. But there was nothing left for him to feel. Hua Cheng had poured too much spiritual power into him, so much more than the cursed shackle could ever hope to restrain. The two shackles that had fettered him for 800 years had shattered. What? That's the end of the chapter. That's the end of the chapter. We're on page 101. The note I wrote down for a moment, just such as this, is that one of the main points that has just been made of this entire fucking series is actually a point just about life in general that is very important to me as somebody who grew up, I guess the gentle word is ignored as a kid. And one of the ways that people in my position tend to kind of look at the world or compensate things is that then you kind of like, you want as many people to love you as possible to try to make up for a lack of love in your childhood. That's not the only reason that people can, want a lot of people to pay attention to them. But also specifically when you're ignored as I was as a child, it just literally makes you feel seen. But the problem is that it is not, to quote one of my favorite movies, The Greatest Showman, it's not about everybody loving you. It's about the right people loving you. It's about the small group that you can cultivate around you. Who the fuck cares about everybody else, right? Just as long as a few good people, a few right people, and sometimes one, love you, and really see you, that's what really matters, right? And that's real hard to learn when you kind of absorb this false notion about popularity and coolness, and if you don't have all eyes on you, then you have no eyes on you, and it gets real complicated. So that being the fucking core moment right there, may have spoken to one or two parts of my psyche. Just saying. We're on page 101 for chapter 130, which, still kind of nervous. It's called Smiling as Red Robes Fade. I don't really like the implication there, considering who we know who likes to smile and who we know who wears red robe. It doesn't immediately, assuage my concerns going on right now. One more sip of tea, though, because Jesus. How is this possible? Mu Cheng muttered. How can there be so much to shatter cursed shackles with spiritual power alone? It was completely unheard of for anyone to manage such a feat. Also, we're about headed headlong into the metaphor of wow, to very easily sum up, it's the Monsters, Inc. metaphor. You thrive on fear and hatred and resentment, not in Monsters, Inc., but you thrive on fear, hatred, and resentment, but what is actually more powerful is joy and love, etc., and all that jazz. I fucking love the message in Monsters, Inc., by the way. This is a compliment. This is a high compliment, because this is an entirely much more complex way of coming about to a similar point that we are headed towards. Xie Lian was slumped on the ground, but Hua Cheng pulled him to his feet. Gaga, try fighting again. At the same moment, Jun Wu lunged at them with his blade drawn. Without thinking, Xie Lian raised his hand to slap it away. Jushin was almost sent flying. This strike was something completely different. Xie Lian stared at his hands, feeling a little dazed. It had been hundreds of years since he felt like this, indomitable, barely able to control his own strength, each step shaking mountains. One step to cross 1,000 miles, one step to ascend to the heavens. He'd almost forgotten that he was ever like this. He clenched his hand, then violently punched Jun Wu in the face. Satisfying! I want to see that animated, please. Throughout their battle so far, Jun Wu's face had remained untouched. When the punch landed, a drop of blood finally flowed from the corner of his lips. He thumbed it away and gave it a glance. The next second, he threw Jushin aside with a toss of his hand. He was going to fight Xie Lian with bare fists. Good luck with that. Xie Lian threw another punch, but Jun Wu caught his wrist and twisted it around. Agony spiked through Xie Lian's arm as it dislocated with a crack. However, he instantly popped it back into place. He struck again, but his fist was again seized by Jun Wu. Seeing that things still weren't going well, Xie Lian considered snatching up Feng Xin, which had been tossed away. But Jun Wu predicted he'd try that and blocked his path. However, Jun Wu had forgotten that Feng Xin and Mu Qing were still behind him. Although they were both so injured they could hardly move, they had hatched a plan to sneak around and grab Feng Xin. They moved extremely lightly and stealthily, yet it was as if Jun Wu had grown eyes on his back, and he sent a palm blast behind him. The bridge under their feet cracked and crumbled, and they both fell with it, plunging toward the lava stream. At the last moment, a hand caught Feng Xin's boot, and Feng Xin caught Mu Qing's boot. When Feng Xin looked up, he cried, "What the fuck? What the actual fuck? State Preceptor, your elderliness, please don't ever let go, alright?" It was, in fact, the State Preceptor who caught them. Veins were bulging violently on his forehead. "So you do know I'm too old for this. Hurry up and climb up then." When Jun Wu smashed that section of the bridge, Xie Lian raised a hand to grab it and keep it suspended in mid-air. He wanted to lift it a bit further, but Jun Wu wouldn't give him the space. And so the three of them were hanging a mere dozen meters away from the churning lava. They could even hear each bubble pop. Mu Qing especially was in a terrifying position, dangled at the very bottom of the chain, and worse, upside down. If they weren't careful, his head would get a lava bath. Steam had boiled Mu Qing's face as red as hot. I'm too excited. Steam had boiled Mu Qing's face as red as a hot coal. "Quick, pull me up," he cried. But the two above him didn't even manage to yank on him twice before he shouted again, "Wait! Don't pull me up!" "Which do you want?" the State Preceptor cried in exasperation. "Are you for real? Fine, I'm letting go," Feng Xin yelled. "What the fuck? Fucking let go for real, I dare you," Mu Qing cursed. He gestured below. "Look down! Look, the sword!" Only then did they notice the black jade longsword that was slowly sinking in the heart of the lava stream right below them. It was Feng Xin, the sword they'd been trying to steal before Jun Wu shook them off the bridge. As if he desperately wished he were a gibbon, Mu Qing reached out and crazily swung his arms at the sword. But he couldn't reach it no matter how hard he tried. "Lower me down a bit more, just a bit more, and I can get it." The veins on the State Preceptor's forehead were throbbing even harder now. "Don't overdo it, you little pair of brats. I'm only an old sack of bones." As he said that, he lowered the boot in his hand, and Mu Qing's face drew another notch closer to the surface of the lava. His hair slipped loose and the ends were set alight. "Fucking hell, your hair's on fire. It's all gonna burn," Feng Xin exclaimed. Thankfully, Mu Qing had finally pulled the sword out of the stream. He tossed the sword towards Xie Lian, sending splashes of lava along with its flight, and then began frantically slapping away the patches of flame on his hair. "Xie Lian, catch!" Xie Lian swung his arm upward and caught Feng Xin by the hilt. As for the State Preceptor, he was at his limit. "I can't do this anymore. Both of you, get up here now." Feng Xin saw that the State Preceptor was trembling and realized things were going bad. He yanked at Mu Qing and flung him higher. "Enough of all your yammering and dilly-dallying." Taking issue at being hurled around like this, Mu Qing was winding up for a major fit. But before he could begin, dozens of molten vengeful spirits lunged out of the lava pool. Like fish leaping out of water, the molten vengeful spirits surged upward and caught Feng Xin around the chest. If it wasn't for the spiritual light shielding his body, he probably would have been burnt to ash. Earlier, Feng Shin's arrows had sent the spirits running scared, but with hearts full of spite, they had stealthily dived below the lava's surface, followed him all the way here, and hid until they got a chance to drag him down. The state preceptor was also hauled forward by the sudden increase in weight and began to slip. It was now Mu Qing's turn to be at the very top of the chain, and he caught the state preceptor by his boots. Feng Shin was already injured, and there were still a few arrows in his body that he'd forgotten to pull out. Although he fought the vengeful spirits with his bare fists, he was mindful that the people above him might lose their grip if he fought too hard, and so it was a very passive bout. More and more molten, vengeful spirits gathered down below, climbing atop and over one another as they clung to Feng Shin. It was almost as if they were having a tug of war against the state preceptor and Mu Qing. Both sides had significant strength, and Feng Shin would surely be torn in half if this continued. "Can we just get this over and done with?" Feng Shin roared. "Shut up!" Mu Qing yelled back. Suddenly he felt the weight he was holding lighten. The vengeful spirits had finally let go, so he quickly pulled the other two up to safety. Feng Shin panted harshly, still visibly shaken. The shrieks and roars of the vengeful spirits continued to echo from below. When they looked down into the pit, Mu Qing and the state preceptor said in unison, "Feng Shin, it's your son." Sure enough, a blanched creature was hopping among the red-hot molten vengeful spirits and crazily tearing at them with its teeth. The molten vengeful spirits were all ancient ghosts, at least 2,000 years old. Plus, they had banded into groups. Why would they be afraid of some little minion that wasn't even a baby? Even as it continued to scratch and bite, the fetus spirit's once chillingly white body was painted crimson red with burns and blood from head to toe. It was howling in a ghastly voice, not pitiful in the slightest and inspiring only horror, but Feng Shin exploded in outrage. "A bunch of adults bullying a child? How fucking shameless! So, come here!" The fetus spirit couldn't defeat so many vengeful spirits, and fear had already sprouted in its heart. Hearing that someone was going to stand up for it, it let out a strange cry and jumped onto Feng Shin's shoulder. With longbow in hand, Feng Shin yanked the arrows from his own chest and shot round after round, overturning the lava stream with their explosive impacts. As he did so, the fetus spirit hopped and screeched on his shoulder like it was jeering and cheering. Xie Lian saw that they had escaped danger, and he finally relaxed. But just as he was about to focus on fighting Jun Wu again, he felt his chest tighten. Jun Wu had seized him from behind, locking him in place. "Haven't I told you before? Where do you think you learned all your moves? I know everything about you." If Xie Lian couldn't fight his way out of this hold, he was going to end up dead. But any move he could come up with to break free, Jun Wu would have already thought of too. Just then, he heard Hua Cheng call out, "Guga, don't be afraid. You must know a move he doesn't. A move only you can use, and he can't." A light turned on in Xie Lian's mind. Did he have such a thing? Yes, he did. If he couldn't break free, then he wouldn't. He turned in Jun Wu's arms to face him and locked his own arms around his opponent. "I bet you don't know about this," he declared, enunciating each word. Gripping Jun Wu tightly, Xie Lian carried him to the solid rock wall and slammed him against it with enormous force. He put all of his power into the blow. Amidst the rumbling and crashing of rocks, he heard something breaking. The sound had come from Jun Wu. His white armor had shattered. At the same time, Jun Wu released him with a roar of outrage. Get lost, all of you, get lost!" When Xie Lian saw it, a chill went down his spine. The things he saw, the things that just made Jun Wu go mad, were faces. Those 3 faces had emerged once more. Raising his sword, Xie Lian pierced Jun Wu's heart and nailed him to the rock wall. Blood spurted from Jun Wu's mouth. Xie Lian had infused as much spiritual power as he could muster into the strike, and it exploded the instant Jun Wu was stabbed. No matter how strong their healing ability was, no one could recover from that blow. The wall collapsed. Jun Wu had been pinned to it at first, but once it crumbled, he was brought to the ground with it and sprawled in the rubble. Yet still, he hadn't given up. His hand seized functions His hand seized function's hilt, and he moved to write something upon the blade, some kind of spell that they had clearly better stop. But just as Xie Lian raised his hand, the state preceptor rushed over. "Your Highness, let it go, let it go!" Xie Lian stopped. He wasn't sure which one of them the state preceptor was calling for, or whom he was begging to let go. Jun Wu coughed out another mouthful of rage-filled blood. "Get away from me!" The state preceptor knelt by his side. "Your Highness, let it go. Really, let it all go. Continuing this fight is pointless." "You don't understand anything. Get lost!" Jun Wu yelled. "You're right, I don't understand," the state preceptor said. "It's been so many years. You've been a god, and you've been a ghost king. Everyone who deserved to be killed is dead. All you've ever wanted is in your grasp. So why are you doing this to yourself? What exactly do you want? What do you want to prove?" Hearing this, confusion flashed across Jun Wu's face. But his daze didn't last long, and he violently gripped the state preceptor by the neck. "Stop trying to lecture me. You have no right to lecture me," he snarled. "No one has the right." Little strength remained to Jun Wu right now, so breaking free of his stranglehold would have hardly been difficult. Xie Lian was about to save his master when the state preceptor waved, signaling for him not to move. "Oh, your Highness," the state preceptor continued. Jun Wu glared at him coldly, but his hand didn't loosen. Even if Jun Wu didn't have sufficient strength, wringing the state preceptor's neck was still an easy task, and he was still in considerable danger. However, he just let Jun Wu choke him. "When I set out to teach His Royal Highness, it was never my intent to nurture a version of you who had never walked the wrong path, or to use him to humiliate you. He's his own person, and you are your own," the state preceptor said. "You were different people all along, with different paths, and that's the most natural thing. I've told you that before, but you didn't believe me. How about now?" Jun Wu stared at him, not saying a word. "I just genuinely really miss your Highness," the state preceptor said. "I miss our old kingdom of Wuyang. I miss everyone from back then. I miss the days before we ascended. That's all." "It's been so many years," the state preceptor added. "Just watching you makes me tired. Very tired. How about you? Aren't you exhausted?" As the #1 martial god of the three realms, Jun Wu's appearance and poise had always been perfect and untainted by filth. Only now, when all the light had faded from him, did Xie Lian notice that Jun Wu's complexion was overly pale, even without those three faces. His contours were much too cold and hard, and the faint dark circles below his eyes made him appear indescribably gloomy. There was none of the gentle kindness he'd emanated when spiritual light had illuminated his form. But even if he looked sickly, he finally looked alive. "Your Highness, you've been defeated. Now set yourself free," the state preceptor said gently. "Have I been defeated?" Jun Wu sounded a little lost. The forceful wave of spiritual power had broken through the domed ceiling of the rocky cave, and scattered rays of wan sunlight peeked in. A few faint threads of rain drifted down. As Xie Lian stood over Jun Wu, who lay sprawled on the ground, he noticed a trace of relief on his face. Like a heavy burden had finally been lifted. He couldn't help but wonder, deep down, perhaps Jun Wu had wished for someone to defeat him, for someone to put these relentless eons of brokenness and madness to an end. A moment later, Jun Wu asked, "That move, what is it called?" Xie Lian raised his sleeve and wiped away the blood on the side of his face. "Shattering boulders on one's chest." Jun Wu was briefly taken aback. It seemed that made him think of something. Finally, he chuckled and sighed as he closed his eyes. Beautiful. He didn't utter another word. Everyone could tell fatigue had overtaken him. Xie Lian finally removed his hand from Feng Shen's hilt. He had no idea what to do next, so he unconsciously turned to Hua Cheng. Hua Cheng was still standing in the same spot, upon the only stretch of the heaven-crossing bridge that hadn't yet collapsed, and had been quietly waiting for him for a long time, arms crossed. Seeing that Xie Lian had turned to look at him, he met his eyes and smiled. The state preceptor sat unmoving next to Jun Wu. "Your Highness, all of you should go now." He clearly didn't intend to get up. "Master, are you not coming?" Xie Lian asked. "Oh, shit. Art." The state preceptor shook his head. "I'll keep His Highness company. After all, I didn't stay by his side back then." The rain was coming down harder now. It scoured Jun Wu's resting face, washing away the blood that flowed from his wounds. As it poured across his skin, Xie Lian thought that the 3 lesions on his face had faded somewhat. Maybe it was his imagination. After a moment of silence, Xie Lian took the bamboo hat from his back and lowered it over Jun Wu's face to shield him from the rain. The cursed shackle on Mu Qing's wrist had broken off on its own, and Mu Qing punted the thing into the lava with a swift kick before forcing himself back into his cool, calm demeanor. The fetus spirit jumped down from Feng Shen's shoulder and crawled to Jun Wu on all 4 limbs to touch him cautiously. Its attitude was completely different than when it was stomping on Feng Shen's face, and Feng Shen stomped his own feet in anger at the sight. Xie Lian, however, didn't care for anything else. With a battered face, he dashed straight for Hua Cheng like he had been reborn. In truth, he had only barely escaped death, and pounced on him. "Sen Lung!" Hua Cheng had just reached a hand out to Xie Lian when his tackle pushed him back a step. He wrapped his arms around him and smiled happily. "Guga, you see? I told you that you'd win for sure, didn't I?" He lifted Xie Lian's face and carefully inspected it, then sighed. "You've gotten yourself all scraped up again." A tiny silver butterfly fluttered where his fingers caressed, and the cuts faded. Xie Lian smiled happily in response. "I'll be more careful next time." Hua Cheng arched his brows, pretending to be cold and harsh. "There is no next time." Look at this goddamn art. Look at it. You kinda just want to sob for about half an hour. After a pause, Xie Lian withdrew his smile and said seriously, "Sen Lung, back when we were inside Mount Tonglu, I said that I wanted to tell you something after we got out. Do you still remember?" Hua Cheng smiled. "Of course I remember. I remember everything, Guga tells me." Xie Lian hung his head. It took a moment before he finally gathered his courage and began to tell him the truth. Earlier, Jun Wu divulged some bits of information about this. To be honest, I should have told you a long time ago. I just could never find the nerve because I was afraid of how you'd react when you found out. Found out that your Highness almost became the white-clothed calamity, right? Hua Cheng continued for him. You... Xie Lian murmured in shock. Hua Cheng didn't answer him directly. Instead, he bent on one knee and knelt on the ground before him. He raised his head to gaze at him with a broad smile. "How's this? Guga, do you remember me now?" How could he not? Back then, the nameless ghost had always bent the knee to him just the same. A phantom image of that pale, smiling mask overlapped with Hua Cheng's current smiling face. Xie Lian's heart quivered, his knees buckled, and he slumped to the ground in front of him. Sanlong, it was you all this time. Hua Cheng let out a small laugh as he continued to kneel, and his remaining eye gazed deeply at Xie Lian. Your Highness, I've always watched you. Xie Lian could still only utter one word. You... He finally understood what all those seemingly unintentional words from Hua Cheng had meant. So this was it. He had never imagined that Wu Ming was Hua Cheng. He knew everything. He had seen everything. He had been there all along. All at once, thousands of emotions and millions of words swarmed into his head. There was gratitude, there was shame, there was heartache, there was wild joy. But above all else, there was incurable love. Page number. Xie Lian's heart was so full it was going to burst, but he could not squeeze out a single word to express himself. He could only tackle Hua Cheng forcefully, with a cry of Sanlong. It was as if that was all he knew to say anymore, and he cried it again, Sanlong. Hua Cheng fell over with the tackle. He sat with Xie Lian on the ground, embracing him and laughing heartily. All his fears and worries had been swept away. Xie Lian circled his arms around Hua Cheng's neck tightly, laughing and laughing, but feeling like he was going to cry. But before his tears could fall, he suddenly noticed something was very wrong. Although Hua Cheng was a ghost, his body had never been any different from that of an ordinary man. And yet, as Xie Lian held him now, his vivid red robes were going transparent. See? Xie Lian grabbed him, demanding in alarm, Sanlong, what's going on? Hua Cheng still seemed at ease. It's nothing. I've just overdone it a little. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Xie Lian said in shock. How can you call this nothing? It was the spiritual power. All that spiritual power. When Hua Cheng transferred his power to Xie Lian, he always gave without restraint, as if he were an infinite source, as if all of it were free for Xie Lian's taking. He just kept smiling, ever cheerful, never treating it like a burden. But his spiritual power wasn't as inexhaustible as sand carried in by the rolling waves, so it couldn't truly be endless. He wouldn't blame Hua Cheng for failing to say anything sooner. Xie Lian could only blame himself for failing to notice. Little column A, little column B there. Panicked and full of remorse, Xie Lian cupped Hua Cheng's face. Why didn't I see this coming? I should have seen this coming for sentences now. I'll return it to you, he said. Then he kissed him. Feng Xin and Mu Qing had been on their way over, but when they saw the scene before them, they hurriedly backpedaled dozens of meters to give them the space to do what they needed to do. The cursed shackles were gone, so Xie Lian desperately tried to transfer all the spiritual power he could muster to Hua Cheng in the hope that he'd recover soon. He kissed him for a good while, but when he let go, the sleeves of Hua Cheng's red robes and his silver vambraces were still translucent, half transparent even. Xie Lian was shaken, fear overtaking his mind. He unconsciously reached out to cup Hua Cheng's face again, leaning in to kiss some more, but Hua Cheng cradled Xie Lian's face with swift hands and gave him a small peck with smiling lips. Although I'm happy Gaga is so forward, there's no need to give me any more spiritual power. But if Gaga isn't just lending spiritual power, if he simply wants to kiss me, I don't mind at all. In fact, the more the better. I welcome it with open arms. Yet another plot twist. Xie Lian gripped him tightly on the brink of falling apart. What's going on? I'm just taking a little break, that's all, Hua Cheng replied. Gaga, don't be scared. Xie Lian clutched his head. How can I not be scared? I'm going to lose my mind. Hua Cheng was the sort of person who would never let Xie Lian see him like this if it wasn't a serious problem, so serious he could no longer hide it. Spiritual power was so abundant it could shatter 2 cursed shackles. Spiritual power so abundant it could shatter 2 cursed shackles. Just how much would that be exactly? It would hardly be an exaggeration to say it would require power as bountiful as the sea. So how could Hua Cheng claim he was fine? They went through so much hardship to sort out this mess and tie off all the knots. They'd reopened the line of communications between him, Feng Shen, and Mu Qing. The cursed shackles that had bound him for 800-some years had been shattered. Everything he'd always wanted to confess to Hua Cheng had already been said. Yet when Xie Lian turned to run into Hua Cheng's arms with a face full of smiles, what greeted him was a Hua Cheng who was about to fade away. How could he not be scared? He was going to go mad with fear. Noticing something was wrong, Feng Shen and Mu Qing called out from afar, Your Highness, what happened? Sorry, I just had this really hilarious mental picture of them doing that, but like with their eyes closed. Them being like, what happened? What? Because they don't want to, impose. They jogged a couple steps in his direction, but they paused halfway when they sensed that they shouldn't interfere so carelessly right now. In that moment, Xie Lian had stopped caring for anyone else. He wore an expression of pure terror as he gripped Hua Cheng, and his heart had almost stopped beating. What do I do? Hua Cheng sighed quietly and extended his arms, once again folding Xie Lian into his embrace. Your Highness, I've always watched you. That was the second time he'd said it, but his voice was softer and gentler than before. Mind blank, Xie Lian clutched the red robes at his chest. I know, but what should I do now? Hua Cheng's long, slender fingers gently combed through Xie Lian's mussed hair. Your Highness, do you know why I refuse to leave? Xie Lian couldn't understand how Hua Cheng could still be so calm at a time like this. He, on the other hand, was panicking so hard he was trembling. Completely at a loss, he still blankly asked, Why? Because I have a beloved who is still in this world, Hua Cheng replied quietly. Xie Lian was slightly stunned. He'd heard that somewhere before. Oh my god, that's right! We haven't done this yet! Oh my god! We haven't done this yet! Sorry. A lot going on at the moment. Too much going on at the moment. Way too fucking much. Holy shit. Where am I? Where the fuck am I? I'm over here. Hang on. My beloved is a brave, noble, gracious, special someone, Hua Cheng continued. He saved my life, and I've looked up to him ever since I was young. But I wanted to catch up to him and become even stronger for his sake. Although he might not remember me well, we never really talked. I want to protect him. He gazed at Xie Lian. If your dream is to save the common people, then my dream is only you. Relying on his memory, Xie Lian asked with a trembling voice, But you won't be able to rest in peace like this? I pray to never rest in peace, Hua Cheng replied. In that instant, Xie Lian's breathing completely stopped. Frozen in this moment, he could faintly hear two voices, one questioning and the other answering. If your beloved knew you couldn't rest in peace because of them, they might feel troubled and guilty. Then I just won't let them know why I haven't left. If you meet too often, they'll find out sooner or later. Then I won't let them know I'm protecting them either. That ball of ghost fire, the weak little ball of ghost fire he bought for a few pennies on that lantern night long ago. The ghost fire who wanted to pull him up from the graves on a frozen winter's eve. The ghost fire who tried to shield him from White No-Face and wouldn't let him go near danger. The ghost fire who had screamed in torment on his behalf as 100 swords pierced his heart. Your Highness, I understand your everything, Hua Cheng said quietly. Your courage, your despair, your kindness, your pain, your resentment, your hate, your wisdom, your foolishness. If I could, I would have you use me as your stepping stone, the bridge you take apart after crossing, the bones you need to trample on your climb, the sinner who endures the agony of 1,000,000 knives. But I know you won't allow it. As he spoke, the maple red of his robes continued to fade away. Xie Lian tried to grab hold of him with shaking hands. He never stopped trying to transfer spiritual power to him, but even that couldn't prevent Hua Cheng from fading. His vision was going blurry, and his words staggered from his lips. All right. All right, don't say any more. I get it, but don't be like this, all right? Senlong, I've borrowed so much spiritual power from you that I haven't repaid. And I'm not done telling you all the things that I wanted to say. There's still so much. It's been so long since anyone listened to me talk. Won't you stay? Don't do this. I won't be able to take it. Twice it's happened, twice already. I really don't want there to be a third time. Hua Cheng had already vanished from this world twice because of him. But Hua Cheng only replied, to die in battle for you is my greatest honor. Those were words like a fatal blow. Xie Lian could no longer hold back the tears in his eyes, and they began to pour. As if he were hanging on the last thread of his life, he pleaded, You said you would never leave me. But Hua Cheng replied, There is no banquet in this world that doesn't come to an end. Agony constricted his heart and throat, and Xie Lian couldn't speak another word. He bowed his head and buried it deep in Hua Cheng's chest. Yet soon after, he heard Hua Cheng say above him, But I will never leave you. Xie Lian's head shot up. I will come back, Hua Cheng said. Your Highness, believe me. Although his voice was firm, his pale face had also begun to fade. Xie Lian wanted to touch his cheek, but his fingertips only slid through air. Startled, he locked eyes with Hua Cheng once more. Hua Cheng's gaze was both gentle and blazing. His remaining eye was filled with love as it stared at him silently. He said something, but there was no sound from his lips. Refusing to give up, desperate to hear him, Xie Lian reached out with both hands to grab him and yank him deeper into his arms. But before he could do so, the one he was holding and the one holding him disappeared. In an instant, Hua Cheng shattered into thousands of silver butterflies right before Xie Lian's eyes, transforming into a breeze of twinkling stars that he could neither embrace nor hold. Even as his arms came up empty, he maintained that hugging position, not moving a limb. He couldn't tell if he hadn't come to his senses yet, or if his body simply couldn't move anymore, but he stayed there kneeling amidst the dreamlike array of butterflies, his eyes wide. I was glimpsing the art out of the corner of my eye, but then I had to look at it, and I saw his face. So I'm not going to look at it again, but I'm going to inflict it on y'all, because I'm not going to be the only one to see this. This is rude. This is deeply fucking rude. Even with the assurance that he's gonna come back, this is fucking rude. Why is she doing this to me? We don't know. Where are we? We're only a couple of pages away from the end of the chapter. Okay. As they... Oh, thank you for the reminder, Katrine. Yes, I have wine right here. Oh. As they looked on from a distance, Feng Shen and Mu Cheng had never imagined that this was how things would play out. Both their faces paled as they rushed forward. Your Highness! Feng Shen was the first to arrive. How did things go so wrong out of nowhere? Wasn't he fine just a few minutes ago? Was it because of the cursed shackles? Mu Cheng hobbled up right behind him. He couldn't jump, so he instead yelled at the silver butterflies. Crimson Rainsot Flower, don't mess around. If you're not dead, then come the hell out. Naturally, the silver butterflies did not answer him. They fluttered erratically, flapping their wings and rising toward the sky. Feng Shen reached out to pull Xie Lian up, but he remained weighted to the ground like a stone. Feng Shen didn't know what to do anymore. Is there some way we can help? Do you need spiritual power? Can he be saved? What should we do? Mu Cheng, however, had already figured out what had happened. Drop it. Just shut your mouth. We can't do anything at this point. The air was alight with a shimmering, twinkling glow. The butterflies' wings sparkled, just as they had during their first reunion after 800 years apart. A silver butterfly drifted over and lightly brushed the back of Xie Lian's hand, his cheek, his forehead. Its actions were full of affectionate longing, as if it were whispering its goodbyes. Xie Lian numbly extended a hand and let it rest there. The silver butterfly fluttered its wings in delight, and sure enough, it lingered for him. But it too couldn't last. It wasn't long before it scattered on the wind like the rest. However, in the spot where it had perched on Xie Lian's third finger, there was still a bright, vivid, red string. She's fucking sick. She's unhinged. She is sick and twisted. If I ever reach half of the height of her unbelievably sick nature, then I will consider my life complete. Because who could... There's something not... She's not... You know, like, we hate her for a reason. There's a scene break right there, by the way. We're at the top of 121. And then... It's done. It's done. It's done. Pei Ming finally could hold back no longer. That's not possible. This can't be all there is. Even an amateur like me can tell we're not done yet. This is the most meta thing I've seen from MXTX so far. That is so meta. I love it so much. That is some meta bullshit. Mu Cheng dropped the heavy bookkeeping report on the table. This is my work and it's done, he said coolly. I can calculate all of it again on the spot. Please listen closely, General Pei. Take away 8,888,000 merits, then add 6,660,000 merits, plus another 17,200,000 merits, then minus... Alright, that's enough. You don't need to count anymore. Feng Shen interrupted. The numbers are right, but there must have been a lot left out. It should have worked out otherwise. That's not my problem, Mu Cheng countered. Either way, my calculations are right. Maybe you should find someone else to do the accounting? If I had known things were going to be like this, I would have minded my own business. After the heavenly capital was destroyed, the scattered and scrambled heavenly officials finally assembled and set up a ward to establish a temporary upper court at the summit of Mount Taisang, a place no mortals cared about. Currently, the heavenly officials were in the heat of discussion about the construction of the new heavenly capital. The enormous fire had very fortunately raised the heavenly officials' glorious golden palaces, forcing them to squeeze together in temporary tents as they conferred and rested. Furthermore, a great number of scrolls and reports were lost. Even as the bickering dragged on for days and days, they still couldn't straighten out any of their accounts. One of Pei Ming's arms was hung in a sling, and the other hand rubbed his chin. Is it my imagination, or is Chuan Zhen even more sarcastic these days? Hasn't he always been this bad? He's just too lazy to hide it now, Feng Xin responded. Mu Qing rolled his eyes, and everyone pointed their fingers at him. Decorum, they chided. Mu Qing pointedly turned and left. Chuan Yizhen was in bandages from head to toe, so he resembled a human-shaped Zhongji? There's a footnote about that. A ball of sticky rice wrapped in bamboo or reed leaves, usually with some kind of filling. Only the top of his head and his messy curly hair could be seen. His words were muffled and unclear when he said, "What do we do now? Who's going to do all the math?" Everyone exchanged glances, cleared their throats, and quietly backed away. No one wanted to take on such a difficult and thankless task. Seeing this, Pei Ming sighed. If only Ling Wen were here. That's literally what I just thought. That's what I just thought. If I could have recalled her name quickly and like right off the top of my head, I would have said it, but I didn't. But that's exactly what I thought. All else aside, no one can complain about the way she managed things. There'd be nothing to be afraid of, even with the palace of Ling Wen reduced to ash. She knows the ins and outs of this mess of accounts like the back of her hand. I'm sure she would have gotten it sorted within a day. After struggling on this godforsaken mountain for so long, most of the officials shared the same sentiment deep down. They just didn't dare say it out loud. However, now that someone had taken the initiative to voice it, they all began loudly agreeing. Yeah, I'll never say the Palace of Ling Wen is inefficient again. I already hadn't said that in a while. Just then, someone from outside came in to announce, "Everyone, Lord Rainmaster has arrived." The heavenly officials' faces brightened at this, and they immediately went out to greet her. Pei Ming's expression was unreadable. He hesitated for a moment and ultimately chose not to go outside with them. Another voice called out, "Your Highness, you've come too." That's the end of the chapter. And that's 5 o'clock. This is where we have to stop. I just kept all that screaming internal, so I didn't deafen everybody. That's page 125 that we're at. Chapter 131, called Atop Mount Taisung, Thousands of Kinds of Dust Settle. Yeah, that's a great name for a denouement, you know? When you have to wrap up all the loose ends in the free world, yeah. That's a very apt title. Whew. Holy Jesus. Where's my bookmark? There it is. Oh my God. Holy shit. You know, I always appreciate a story that has more empathy than me. I practice in trying to have as much empathy and compassion as humanly possible. Because no one's born evil, they're made evil. I don't know. It's just how I like to view humanity, right? I try to do it with as much empathy and compassion as possible. I don't always get there, but I try, you know? And, especially in fiction, you know, sometimes I succumb to bloodlust just like everybody else. And sometimes you just want to see, you know, some piece of shit villain get what's coming to them, right? And it's rare, but whenever somebody subverts that and kind of right at the end says, no, we're going to treat them like a human, I respect that a million times over. That's pretty gutsy, especially in a story this long, to go 750,000 words, right? And then at the end be like, actually, everybody's fucking human. That's ballsy to me. That's when I talk about stories taking risks, that absolutely counts as a big risk. Because not everybody wants to read about that, you know, for some very, very fair and totally valid reasons. Because again, sometimes you just want to watch the villain get the shit kicked out of them. But this kind of story will always like stick in my heart a little bit more. And so that's about the millionth thing that I appreciate about this story, but that goes pretty close to the top. If we were going to make like a top 10 list of all the things that mean the most to me in this story, which would take a while for me to, that's just daunting to think about. That would be very close to the top. That's a huge, that's a huge one. It just would, for me personally. I'm gonna go collapse because it's already past 5, so I just have to go. Even though after something like that, I just kind of want to sit here and talk to you for the next 2 hours. I cannot, unfortunately. If we have, which I think we should, we might, but actually, because we have about 50 pages left of the main story, and I kind of wanted to start the extra stories next week. Gonna have a nice clean, you know, line about that. So I don't know, maybe if we take our time tomorrow, we either take our time tomorrow and take our time on Thursday, and we have time for like a nice big long post story talky rambly digesting session, or we rush to the last 50 pages and try to squeeze that in all tomorrow. Although I feel like we probably shouldn't rush this. Right? Like, this story has so fucking much. You need a discussion. Right? You know, we'll play it by ear. I'll say if we just very neatly come to the end of it in 2 hours tomorrow, then hell, we just may have all of Thursday may just be a, you know, post-story debrief, right? It might just be an hour or so, maybe more. I like to talk. Of just sitting and digesting, and maybe I'll get all the volumes so that I can have them on hand so that I can leaf through them, or something like that. There will be some sort of post-story chat. We'll fit it in somewhere. In the meantime, I am gonna go lay down because that was a climax worth waiting for. That was really a she really did that justice. She really brought that one home. And I feel like, for me, if I was writing something this long, the longer I got, the more and more anxious I would get about writing an ending, writing a climax at the very least. That feels satisfying and worth the wait, right? And that was successful. That was a good one. Holy shit. Thank you so much for hopping on. I hope you had a time. I hope we have a time tomorrow. I'm deeply curious about how this resolves itself in 50 pages, extra stories notwithstanding. I will see you tomorrow to finish this thing. Holy crap. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, night, whatever. Please take care of yourself. Please, for the love of God, for me, if you can't do it for you yet, do it for me. And then eventually we'll get to doing it for you. But do it for me. Take care of yourself, please. And I will see you guys tomorrow.